Hi folks, and welcome to another episode of Coffee Talk. I'm very happy to be back in the studio for this one. I'm so happy to have with us for our first guest in the office. He's a film producer, he's a theater producer, but the reason why we have him here is because he's also a developer. Peter Fine, CEO of Atlantic Development. They've built over 12,000 units over the course of their business, 105 buildings. But what I'm mostly interested in is how does somebody like that get into the movie business? We'll address all of that. Peter, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me.
Peter, the first thing I want to ask you is that how does somebody, your father was a yellow cab driver. Your mother was a teacher,
Bookkeeper.
A bookkeeper. You didn't really have the pedigree or the means or the contacts to become the developer that you are today. Where did you get your start? What gave you the chutzpah to go and say, hey, I want to become a developer? And oh, by the way, Peter also went to NYU for sociology. He was a social worker for 5 years.
When I was an executive in the social service sector, I had developed actually some of the first supported housing in New York City.
What year was that?
88.
Oh, wow.
It was basically an SRO for formerly homeless people. Mm-hmm. And that was a new endeavor in those days. Today, that's like an entire industry.
Right.
It's been continued. I had met my future wife, my future and ex-wife, at the same time, Elizabeth. And I knew I couldn't stay in social work. Not so much because of the money, because it was an emotional toll being a social worker, that you really have to put a lot of emotion in it to help
You didn't
people.
just dip your toe in it. You were there for 5 years.
5 years out of graduate school.
Right.
I wanted to leave social work. That was whatever chapter number that was in my story. Probably like 4, 5, or 6. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Somebody else can count that up.
Yeah.
And so I started a consulting business where I was consulting for nonprofits who wanted to build supported housing.
But what did you know about construction or building?
Very little.
But what made you think that you could be a consultant?
I got the bug. When I was a social worker, I had worked on 2 supported housing projects. I loved the creativity because there's an incredible amount of imagination in envisioning a building, which is a live functioning thing on a piece of dirt.
Yeah.
And in many ways, that's probably still what I enjoy the most. 110 buildings later, by 96, we had started Atlantic Development. Myself and Mark Altheim was my partner. We were starting to dabble in assisted living. But our first real traction in development was I had researched certain rules and law under the 421A law in New York City, which I know is a hot button term. They're probably going to do away with the term.
Which is the 80-20, that if you want to build here, you could do 80 market and 20 affordable housing.
The 421A program at that time required 20% affordability to reduce the real estate taxes in a building in the Manhattan core. Not all over the city. There was a quirk in the law that said that the developer, instead of putting the affordability in the building, could do it anywhere in the city. I and actually 1 or 2 other people, seemingly at the same time in 96, 97, we started building affordable buildings in the Bronx and uptown Manhattan, generating the 421A certificates, which were transferable, and selling them to developers in Manhattan. You name anyone from Donald Trump to Sheldon Solo, and it mushroomed to the point by 2008 we built at least 10,000 affordable units just using that program. And that program, we needed very, very little money. The first land I bought I went down to One Police Plaza
Yeah.
and bought land at auction. So we were able to buy, in those days, a piece of land. The first piece of land I bought was on Hughes Avenue in the Bronx. You never forget the first.
Yeah, yeah.
It was $75,000.
Wow.
And we built an 80-unit building, and there was built-in financing.
But this is your first project ever.
That was our first project.
Your first project was an 80-unit building.
72 units.
72 units, but you didn't have any experience building. Did you partner with somebody who had?
Well, I had built like 12-unit buildings as a consultant.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as having your own risk.
Yeah, right.
The reason why we were able to build so much affordable housing was because there was no government subsidy in it. It was the private market. The private developer in Manhattan was buying the certificate, and that was paying for the affordable housing. So I didn't need subsidy. There was no bureaucracy. There was no waiting around for 3 years to get financing.
Were the lenders smart to it, or did they understand it?
They did. It was very hard in the beginning. We had no track record. The biggest thing was somebody needed to buy the certificate, trust me enough to buy the certificate.
Yeah.
I never forget, there was a very active developer at the time, Trevor Davis. I think it was, he had a partnership with RFR, building a lot of residential buildings in the late 90s. He bought all the certificates that were generated from that first building. So
And he had the means to do it.
he had the means to do it. A 70-unit building generated, it was 5 per unit, so that's 350 certificates, 72 units, 360 certificates. He bought them all. He applied one certificate for every apartment in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And he took a leap of faith because we were building the affordable in conjunction with their market building. And that was the first building I built for myself. And what happened was you couldn't build a condominium in Manhattan after like 2000 without offering the buyer a 421A certificate.
Sure.
So there were years in that period we could be building 9 affordable buildings a year. We
Right.
couldn't keep up with the demand for the certificate.
And then your life must have changed dramatically.
Very quickly, actually, yeah. In fact, the limitation was not the demand, the limitation was finding enough land.
Yeah.
And also being able to survive on 3-4 hours of sleep.
Right.
At one point, we had 2 construction companies
Yeah.
in the office, producing all the housing. And at some point, we were generating money, and then we started to diversify a bit into market rate housing also. On the Bowery and 4th Street, we built a all-market rental building, but we built it to a condo finish. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a lot of that at the time. At the time, most rental housing builders in New York wanted to build a vanilla product because the feeling was you wouldn't get a return, that the rental market was the rental market.
Yeah.
Don't overbuild because you're not going to get a return. We had a little bit of a different idea. We thought if we load it up and make a super luxury rental, we'll beat the market.
Right.
And luckily that's what happened. My vision is not always, nobody bats 1,000%
Right, of course.
in this business, right?
How come you never really partnered with anybody or did any sort of structured finance?
There's a few things. I think a lot about that question, honestly. And one question is, do you want to build a 1 million square foot building and effectively own 10 or 15% of it and have all this structured finance?
Yeah.
Or do you want to build a 150,000 square foot building and own all of it?
Right.
And I guess I always chose the latter. Number one, it felt safer to me to be in control of my own destiny because I'm a pessimist. I'm a New York City working class kid. Mm-hmm. I'm not used to things going my way. So what's going to happen when things go wrong and I have 3 private equity funds, all of whom are smarter than me, who now I have to talk to make decisions, major decisions on a project. And I just thought that I'm going to be spending more of my time dealing with the partnership than I will. It's hard enough to build the real estate.
Right.
The other thing is, when I came up in the 90s, that was the model in New York City.
That you did it on your own.
That you did it on your own. It was only starting in the 2000s and after the recession of '08 that private equity really started to drive real estate development in New York. It's a totally different business than it was in 1992 or 1997.
You said something interesting, that you're a pessimist by nature, and to be a developer you have to be an optimist by nature. That's like a very important characteristic, because you have to bet on the future, right? Like you're constantly betting on the future. They're like, hey, I'm going to go to the Bronx and build all of these units. I mean, most of your projects are in Washington Heights, in the Bronx, in Inwood, in Harlem.
Inwood, the Bronx.
And
I
so,
take a lot of pride in helping the renaissance of the Bronx over the last 25 years.
Yeah.
A lot of pride in that.
I still feel like it has a lot of room to go, to be honest with you.
We're building a market rate building now in Mott Haven.
On Mott Haven.
Yeah.
The home of SSM, right? That was the big gang that used to run all of Mott Haven. Which,
by the way, that first piece of property I bought at One Police Plaza in 1995 or 6, I bought it on Hughes Avenue, and there was a Puerto Rican motorcycle gang that used the lot for recreation and to run pit bulls.
Right.
I'll never forget the first time I went out to the site. There were all these guys with beards down to their belly buttons lounging on beach chairs with their dogs. And I went, and I was, I don't know how old I was at the time, 30, 35. And they said, well, who are you? Right? And I said, well, I'm the schmuck that just bought.
I'm your neighbor.
That just bought the property.
Right.
So you have to have vision and trust in the future to be a developer, but you want to manage risk, right? I've anticipated everything, and that's what I mean. That it helps to grow up in a way where you don't expect things to come your way. If I was lending money to a project, I'd probably want to lend money to that kid who's trying to anticipate everything that can go wrong, as opposed to the person who's, selling a flower pot.
It's interesting because you go into different asset classes, right? Like, so you do the affordable housing, you started doing some luxury condos over the years, but now you've built, I don't know how many schools, eight schools that you have 8 schools that are working
in the middle
right
of
and so are you just sort of going where the opportunities are, or there's like an interest in these things, or you believe in the development of certain asset classes?
I am always looking to push the envelope into new asset classes, especially in working class neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods in New York City. And I feel like contributing to help build schools, build them and lease them, is I'm creating facilities that are adding to the opportunity for kids in these neighborhoods, because unfortunately the public school system, not in total, but in many instances, is failing our kids. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs in education today, especially in the charter movement, and they need a real estate partner to create the physical reality.
How did you make that contact? I mean, you're doing it for 8 different charter schools. It's not the same charter school, right? You're doing for
it's different networks.
Yeah. So I mean, so you get one. How do you get that first one? And again, like whenever I hear developers say like I do it for the good of the world, I'm always a little skeptical.
It's got to make sense,
right? Yeah.
Look, at the end of the day, we're borrowing 70% of the cost from a bank, right?
Right.
So it's been a lot of work to explain the asset class, where the money's coming from to pay the rent.
Right.
I'm not saving the world. I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to do things that I feel passion for. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to do things in some sense where I feel like I'm an agent for change, because at the end of the day, placing a building on a piece of land is you're creating social change, whether for good or for bad.
Right.
Some people don't like the buildings on 57th Street, right? But
Right.
it was a creative act.
Right.
I'm just trying to do that for certain populations.
So, we were talking about you're a film producer and a theater producer.
Correct.
And, a lot of people say they're producers, but they just write checks and then they go to bed. And you're actually an active producer. I mean, you did In the Heights, you did, which turned out to be a huge hit on
Right.
Broadway.
Interestingly enough, In the Heights, in part, was the result of my real estate work in the Bronx. I had met Lin-Manuel's dad, Luis. He says, my son has a play in workshop off Broadway, actually not too far from the studio.
Sure.
Somewhere in the West 30s. Maybe you want to come down and see it. And blew me away.
Yeah.
It blew me away. And then when they were taking the play to Broadway, believe it or not, they were having trouble raising money.
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine?
Was that the first project? That was the first project? First theater project?
It was. And it was the music that I loved. It was the music and the story. It was a New York immigrant story. It was about aspiration.
Right.
People dreaming, right? And it was very easy to attach to. And I think Lin is, he's a musical genius. And that music just was enough to carry me through whatever I needed to be carried through.
And that was the first sort of a theater movie project that you did, and then
Yeah.
you got the bug after that, or?
I did, when your first endeavor wins a Tony Award.
Yeah.
It's probably not a good thing, but it's really, I just want to do things that I care about and really just capture me. Certainly In the Heights did. I just did a few years ago, there was a one-man play on Broadway, Latin History for Morons. I optioned the book to make a movie about Brownsville, Brooklyn in the 30s. Why? Because, first of all, I think the story of Murder Incorporated coming out of that neighborhood in the 30s, and
Yeah.
the fact that most of them were Jewish, was a story that people would want to see. When the syndicate was created in 1931, it was decided that all killing had to be sanctioned now. It wasn't a free-for-all anymore. Buchalter said, okay, so what we'll do is we'll have on retainer a group of killers, and every kill will be sanctioned by us and go through them. They were credited when they were finally arrested, and most of them executed, with killing 1,000 people.
That's incredible.
From probably like about 1931 to 1940. So they came out of Brownsville, Brooklyn. It happened to be the neighborhood that my dad grew up in. So the attempt to make a movie for me is a little bit of an homage to my dad.
We always say that, developers are like film producers, right? You have to be a sort of a fix-it for all things, and you have to know all things, and you have to be able to step in for different sort of positions and, figure out, make decisions, in all different categories. Do you find that to be true?
Yes, and I don't know how to do it in the film world. I think I'm okay in the real estate world.
Yeah.
But one of my difficulties in trying to create the movie about Murder Incorporated in Brownsville was, you need a lot of knowledge. You need to know writers and production and budgeting. It's an industry, and it's much like real estate. It takes a village. To create a film or a great TV series.
And what advice do you have for people who again had the same sort of a background as you did in today's world?
So develop your craft. Keep learning the craft. And there's a lot to learn. It's not a 100-yard sprint. It's not about killing it on the first project. They develop the craft. you know, build buildings that you know something about. It's not just about attracting the money. At the end of the day, it's about the product. You have to know something about finance. You need to know quite a bit about construction, different construction types.
So you really do have to understand all the different parts of the business.
It's, as you say, it's a lot like the movie producer.
Right.
The guy knows a lot, and he knows nothing in particular,
right,
but he knows a lot.
Right.